Elena Martinez stared at the designer handbag her mother-in-law had just hurled at her feet, its contents spilling across the hardwood floors of the Upper East Side apartment. The same apartment she'd helped renovate last summer, picking out every paint color, every fixture, every detail alongside David. Her husband David, who now stood silent in the corner, his face a mask of indecision as his mother raged. "I told you she wasn't good enough for this family, David." Margaret Winchester's voice carried the sharp edge of old money and decades of getting exactly what she wanted. "Look what she's done to you, to us." Elena's fingers curled into fists at her sides, her wedding ring catching the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 5 years of marriage, of trying to fit into the Winchester world of charity galas and summer homes in the Hamptons, and this was how it ended. "Margaret, please," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just let me explain what happened with the Foundation's accounts." "Explain? Explain?" Margaret's perfectly highlighted hair seemed to bristle. "You embarrassed us in front of the entire board, Winchester Foundation money being transferred to some clinic in the Bronx? Without approval? Those kids weren't our concern. We have specific charitable focuses, protocols, procedures. But you've never understood how things work in our world, have you? Always thinking you know better, with your social work background and your bleeding heart." David finally stepped forward. "Mom, maybe we should all sit down and—" "No, David. I've watched this woman undermine everything we've built for 3 generations. I won't stand for it anymore. Your place is on the street. Pack your things and get out." Elena's eyes met David's, searching for something, anything, of the man who'd once defied his family to marry her. The man who'd sworn, on their first date at that tiny Colombian restaurant in Queens, that he'd never let his family's wealth change who he was. But David's gaze dropped to the floor, and in that moment, Elena knew. The last 5 years had been a slow-motion car crash, and she'd been too in love to see it coming. Every charity ball where she'd worn the wrong thing, every summer in Southampton where she'd used the wrong fork, every board meeting where she'd spoken up instead of staying quietly decorative. "David?" Her voice cracked on his name. Just one word, but it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. He finally looked up, and there was pain in his eyes, but also something worse, resignation. "I'm sorry, Elena, but Mom's right. The Foundation, it's bigger than us. What you did, I can't protect you this time." Elena felt something inside her shatter, but her spine straightened. The daughter of immigrants who'd built a life from nothing, she knew how to face adversity head on. She walked to the bedroom, their bedroom, and pulled out her old duffel bag from the back of the closet, the one she'd brought to America at 17. Margaret's voice followed her. "Don't even think about taking anything we bought you." "Don't worry," Elena called back, her voice razor sharp. "I never wanted your things anyway." She packed quickly, her favorite books, her mother's silver cross, the photos from before she met David. Her social work degree went into the bag, along with a small leather journal where she'd documented every case at the clinic. The clinic that had started all this, where she'd seen too much need to ignore, too many kids falling through the cracks of a system that was supposed to protect them. Her wedding ring caught the light again as she reached for her clothes. With trembling fingers, she slid it off and placed it on the dresser next to the framed photo from their wedding day. She looked so young in that picture, so hopeful, so naive. A sound at the door made her turn. David stood there, watching. "You're really just going to stand there?" Elena asked, stuffing the last of her own clothes into the bag. 5 years, David. 5 years I tried to be what your mother wanted. What you wanted. I never asked you to change," he said quietly. "No? What about when I wanted to keep working at the clinic instead of joining the Foundation? When I suggested we live in Brooklyn instead of the Upper East Side? When I wore jeans Sunday brunch?" Her laugh was bitter. "You never had to ask. Your silence said everything." She zipped the bag closed with finality. "Those kids at the clinic, they needed that money more than your mother needed another wing named after her at the Met." Margaret appeared in the doorway behind David, her pearl necklace gleaming like armor. "Those children weren't your concern. The Foundation has procedures. Those children are everyone's concern." Elena's voice rose. "But you wouldn't know about that, would you? Safe in your tower, deciding who deserves help based on what makes you look good at cocktail parties. How dare you? No, how dare you?" Elena shouldered her bag. "You know what the difference is between us, Margaret? I still remember what it's like to need help. To be one of those people you look down on from your charity galas. And I promised myself I'd never forget." David stepped between them. "Elena, please, we can figure something out. Maybe if you apologize to the board." "Apologize?" Elena shook her head. For helping children get medical care they couldn't afford? For doing exactly what a charitable foundation is supposed to do? She looked at her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, she supposed, and felt a wave of pity. He looked lost, like a little boy caught between his mother and his wife. But he wasn't a little boy. He was a grown man who'd made his choice. You know what's funny, David? I always thought you were the strong one, standing up to your family to marry me. But you weren't strong at all, were you? You were just rebelling, and now you're done playing at being different. Elena walked past them both, head high. In the living room, she paused to look at the view one last time. Manhattan spread out below, a glittering maze of possibilities. Somewhere out there was her next chapter. Maybe it was time to start her own foundation, one that would help people without worrying about social standing or society pages. If you walk out that door, Margaret called after her, don't think you can come crawling back. Elena turned, a smile playing at her lips. Margaret, the day I crawl back here is the day hell freezes over. But thank you for showing me exactly who you are, who you both are. At the elevator, Elena heard footsteps behind her. David had followed her into the hallway, his face twisted with conflict. Where will you go? He asked softly. You lost the right to know that when you stood there and let your mother throw me out of my own home. She pressed the elevator button. But don't worry. Unlike you, I know who I am without a trust fund to define me. The elevator dinged, and Elena stepped inside. As the doors began to close, she saw David reach out as if to stop them, then let his hand fall. His last gesture of indecision. It felt fitting somehow. In the mirrored walls of the elevator, Elena caught her reflection and straightened her shoulders. She looked different already. Lighter. The doorman's face showed surprise when she emerged with just her duffel bag. Mrs. Winchester? Is everything all right? It's Miss Martinez now, Tony. And yes, everything is exactly as it should be. She dug in her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Here's your Christmas bonus. I was saving it for December, but Miss Martinez, you don't have to. You've been kind to me, Tony. That matters more than you know. She pressed the envelope into his hand. Take care of yourself. The street welcomed her with a blast of autumn air. Yellow cabs streamed past, and pedestrians hurried by with their heads down. None of them knew her world had just imploded, or that she was oddly okay with it. Elena pulled out her phone and called the one person who'd never stopped seeing her for who she really was. Mommy? Yes, I'm okay. No, don't worry. Can I come stay with you for a few days? Her mother's voice, warm and strong, filled her ear with rapid Spanish. Of course she could come home. She never had to ask. There was already soup on the stove. Elena felt tears finally threatening as she hailed a cab. Queens wasn't far in miles, but it was a world away from the Upper East Side. Her mother's small apartment above the bakery where she'd worked for 20 years would smell like fresh bread and café con leche. No marble countertops or Viking ranges, but more love than the Winchester mansion had ever held. The taxi driver caught her eye in the rearview mirror. Rough day? You could say that. Elena watched the buildings grow shorter as they headed east. But maybe it's exactly the day I needed. Her phone buzzed. Text messages from David. Please come back. We can talk about this. Mom didn't mean it. I love you. Elena's thumb hovered over the screen before she deleted them all. 5 years ago, those words would have melted her resolve. Now they just made her tired. She thought about the clinic in the Bronx, about Maria, the single mother working 3 jobs whose daughter needed surgery, about Tommy, the bright-eyed kid who just needed glasses to read properly. The money she'd transferred would help them and dozens more. The Winchester Foundation could afford it. Their annual gala budget alone could fund the clinic for a year. Maybe that's what had really infuriated Margaret. Seeing the stark numbers laid bare, the contrast between what they spent on maintaining appearances and what they gave to actual causes. Elena's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sophia from the clinic. Heard what happened. Boards and chaos. Don't worry, I documented everything. You did the right thing. A warmth spread through Elena's chest. She'd known the transfer would be discovered eventually, had known there would be consequences, but she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Making a difference doesn't always look pretty, she texted back. The taxi turned onto her mother's street, where laundry still hung between buildings and music drifted from open windows. Children played hopscotch on the sidewalk, their mothers watching from stoops. This was the New York tourist never saw, the one that felt more real than any charity gala ever had. Her mother was already waiting outside the bakery, wiping her hands on her apron. At the sight of her daughter stepping out of the taxi with just one bag, Rosa Martinez's face showed understanding rather than surprise. She'd always said the Winchesters were playing at being better than everyone else. My amor, she said simply, opening her arms. Elena fell into her mother's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla and yeast. I messed up, Mammy. Or maybe I finally did something right. I'm not sure anymore. Come, Rosa said, taking the bag. First we eat, then we talk. Upstairs, the apartment was exactly as Elena remembered. Family photos covered the walls, including one of her graduation from social work school. Her father's old guitar still hung in its place of honor. The sofa had a new cover, but it was the same one she'd done her homework on as a teenager. Some things don't change, Rosa said, reading her thoughts. And some things need to change. Elena sat at the small kitchen table while her mother ladled soup into bowls. The familiar routine soothed something raw inside her. You know, Rosa said, setting down the bowls, when you married him, I worried. Not because he was rich, money doesn't make a person good or bad, but because he seemed uncertain, like a tree that bends whichever way the wind blows. I thought I could be his anchor, Elena admitted, help him stand up to his family. Ah, mihija. Some people don't want anchors. They prefer to drift. Rosa reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. But you've always known your course. The soup warmed Elena from the inside out, as her mother told her about the neighborhood gossip, the bakery's new recipes, her cousin's baby. Normal life continuing as it always had. Her phone had gone silent. Perhaps David had finally run out of words. You'll stay as long as you need, Rosa said. But knowing you, by tomorrow you'll be planning something new. Elena smiled, her first real smile of the day. Her mother was right. Already ideas were taking shape in her mind. She had contacts from her years at the clinic, other social workers who dreamed of doing more. Maybe losing everything meant she was finally free to build something of her own. Later that night, lying in her childhood bed, Elena opened her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she drafted proposals, made lists, sketched out possibilities. The foundation's money would help those kids, but it was just the beginning. She knew too many people with resources who wanted to make real change, not just pose for photos at galas. A new message popped up from an unknown number. Margaret, you'll never work in philanthropy in this city again. Elena laughed softly in the darkness. The Winchesters still thought small, thinking their social circle was the whole world. She hit delete without responding. Morning light streamed through her window, and Elena woke to the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Her mother was already at work downstairs, the bakery's morning routine as unchanging as the sunrise. Elena stretched and went to the window. The city was waking up. Street vendors setting up their carts, kids heading to school, workers rushing to catch the subway, real people living real lives. Her phone showed missed calls from David, but they didn't matter anymore. She had work to do, a new path to forge. Maybe losing everything wasn't an ending after all. Sometimes you had to lose your place to find where you truly belonged,